Money is the most honest thing in the world. Not because people are honest about money, they are frequently not, but because money itself does not lie. Every dollar has a trail. Every transaction leaves a record. Every account opened, every business registered, every asset transferred, every signature witnessed and notarized and filed. The money knows. The money always knows. People lie about money. They build beautiful stories around money. Stories about shared dreams and joint investments and the future they are building together. And those stories can be so well constructed and so emotionally convincing and so perfectly calibrated to the specific hopes of the person being told them that the person has no reason not to believe them. Not because they are naive. Because the story is true in every way they can verify. The feeling is real. The commitment feels real. The future they can see from inside the story feels absolutely real. The only thing that is not real, the only thing that will not become visible until a forensic accountant sits down with 7 years of financial records and traces every dollar back to its actual destination, is the paperwork. And by the time the paperwork becomes visible, the dream the story was wrapped around has been spent. Every cent of it. Spent and titled and registered and filed in one person's name. Not hers. This is where this story begins. Not with a discovery. With a question that cost a forensic accountant 9 days and 37 years of professional experience to answer. The question was this: where did her money go? Welcome to Venom Thread. The answer is going to make you rethink every conversation you have ever had about shared dreams. Her name was Natalie Chun, and she was 34 years old when she met a man named Patrick Voss at an industry networking event for small business owners and entrepreneurs. Natalie had spent the previous 8 years building a career in digital marketing, first at an agency, then as a freelancer, then as the owner of a small but profitable boutique firm that served a select group of mid-sized companies with the kind of personalized attention that large agencies could not provide. She had been disciplined with her earnings in a way that reflected her background. Her parents had been immigrants who had treated financial prudence not as a virtue, but as a survival mechanism, and she had accumulated, by the time she was 34, savings of $260,000. She had also been saving with a specific goal. She wanted to own something larger than what she had. She wanted a business that had physical infrastructure, that created jobs, that made something she could point to as unambiguously hers. She had been looking for the right opportunity. She had not yet found it. And then she met Patrick. Patrick Voss was 41, attractive in the specific way of a man who has spent time cultivating the impression of easy competence, and possessed of a clarity about business that she found genuinely impressive in their first conversation, and that, in the months that followed, she would continue to find impressive because it never diminished. He had a vision, not a vague aspiration, a specific, structured, financially modeled vision for a premium wellness and fitness facility in a neighborhood that Natalie also believed was underserved. He had done the market research. He had the projections. He knew the cost of the build-out, the expected membership revenue at various occupancy levels, the competitive landscape, the target demographic. He had, in short, everything that a person who is presenting a business opportunity to a potential investor is supposed to have. He did not present it to her as an investor pitch. He presented it as a dream he had been nurturing alone and that he was now sharing with someone he felt understood it. This distinction between a pitch and a shared dream is one that every person who has been inside a financially motivated relationship will recognize as the most important distinction they failed to make. He was not offering her an investment. He was inviting her into something that was already his and was going to remain his and that she would fund. The invitation felt like inclusion. It was not. They began a relationship in the second month of their acquaintance. Not because the relationship was a strategy, or at least, not obviously because of that. And this is the part of the story that takes the longest to process. Patrick was a good partner in the ordinary ways of a person who is also engaged in a longer project. He was present. He was warm. He was interested in her in the way that people are interested in people they are with. Whether any of the relationship was genuine, and Natalie has thought about this with the patience and rigor she brings to everything, is a question she has stopped trying to answer with certainty because she does not believe the answer is fully accessible. What she knows is that the relationship and the business plan were simultaneous. She cannot separate them. She cannot determine which came first in his calculation or whether they were always a single plan. She knows only what followed. Over the first year of their relationship, she contributed $140,000 to the business. She did this through a series of transfers to an account Patrick described as the joint business account, and that she believed was jointly held. She did this in good faith, with full knowledge of the amounts and a clear understanding of what they were for. She was not deceived about the amounts. She was deceived about the account. And she was deceived about something more fundamental than the account. Something that a forensic accountant would find in the first 3 days of a 9-day investigation 3 years later. The business she had been funding was not jointly held. It was not jointly held in the sense that paperwork had been filed incorrectly or names had been omitted in error. It was not jointly held because it had never been jointly held and had never been intended to be jointly held. The LLC that operated the wellness facility had been registered 14 months before Patrick had introduced Natalie to the concept of the business. He had been the sole registered owner and sole manager from day one. She had been funding someone else's business while believing she was funding their business. For 3 years she had believed this. Every dollar she had given him had gone into a structure that existed entirely in his name, including, as the forensic accountant found on day 4, her entire savings of $260,000. The relationship ended in a way that relationships of this kind often end, not through a discovery, but through a withdrawal. Patrick became progressively less available over a 6-month period in year 3 of the business. His explanations were plausible, and they were delivered with the same easy competence that had made him convincing from the beginning. The business was entering a critical growth phase. He was managing investor conversations. There were staffing challenges. He was handling all of it and he needed space to handle it. And she was someone who understood business and would understand that this was a temporary shift, not a permanent change. She understood it for 4 months. In the 5th month, she asked to see the business financials. Not because she was suspicious, she had not yet arrived at suspicious. Because she was a business owner and a person with $260,000 invested in a business, and she had not seen a financial statement in over a year. The request was not unreasonable. His response to the request was where the first signal arrived. He provided financials. But the financials he provided were a version of the business financials that she would later understand, after the forensic accountant had seen the actual ones, had been prepared specifically for her review. They were not fabricated in any way she could have identified at the time. They were accurate in their representation of the period they covered. They simply did not cover the period she needed to see and did not include the account activity that would have shown her where her money had gone. She reviewed them, and she found nothing alarming. She was looking in the wrong place because she had been shown the right-looking wrong place. She was not naive. She was out of her depth in a specific technical direction that she had no reason to anticipate she would need to navigate. She hired the forensic accountant on the recommendation of her attorney. An attorney she had called not because she suspected fraud, but because she had decided that she needed to understand her legal position in the business given that the relationship appeared to be ending and she had not yet been through the process of establishing what the business separation would look like. The attorney had asked one question in their first meeting that changed the entire scope of what followed. She asked, "Can you show me the paperwork for the business entity?" Natalie had said she did not have it, but would get it from Patrick. The attorney had said, "Before you ask Patrick, let me look at the public filings." She looked at the public filings. She found the LLC registration. She found Patrick's name as sole registered owner and sole manager. She found the registration date, 14 months before Natalie had been introduced to the business idea. She looked at Natalie across the table. She said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it as precisely as you can. Did Patrick ever show you any document with your name on it in connection with this business? Any document at all?" Natalie sat with that question for a long time. She reviewed 3 years of her memory with the specific methodical attention of a person who is beginning to understand that the answer is not what she had believed. And she said, "No?" The attorney said, "Then I want to bring in a forensic accountant. Because what you have described to me is not a partnership. What you have described is a funding relationship with no legal structure behind it. And I need to know where the money went." The forensic accountant was a woman named Dr. Sandra Kaur who had 37 years of experience in financial fraud investigation and who had, in that time, seen most of the ways that money could be made to disappear from people who believed it was being held somewhere safe. She received the engagement on a Monday. By Wednesday afternoon, she had found the first thing. The account Natalie had been transferring money into for 3 years was not, as Natalie had been told, a joint business operating account. It was a personal account in Patrick's name, not the business's account, not a joint account of any kind. A personal account that Patrick had described to Natalie as the business account, and that Patrick had used for exactly what a personal account is used for, his personal financial benefit. $140,000, transferred in good faith over 3 years, had gone into a personal account. By Friday morning, Dr. Kaur had found the second thing, which was that Natalie's original $260,000 in savings, the savings she believed had gone into the business at the beginning as a capital contribution, had also not gone into the business. They had been transferred to Patrick through a series of transactions over the first 6 months of the relationship that had been described at the time as investment contributions, and that had in fact gone to a third entity that Dr. Kaur identified by day 4 as a holding company owned entirely by Patrick that appeared in no communication he had ever had with Natalie. For $100,000. Every dollar she had given him. In accounts and structures that carried his name and only his name. None of it in anything that could be described as theirs. Dr. Kaur called Natalie's attorney on Friday afternoon. She said, "I am going to need the full 9 days. And what I find by the end of them is going to be significant." The first twist arrived on day 6, and it arrived in the form of a name that Natalie recognized. Dr. Kaur had been tracing the outflows from Patrick's personal account, the account into which Natalie's transfers had been deposited, and had found a series of transfers to a third party over the preceding 18 months. The third party was a woman, not an unknown woman. A woman whose name Natalie had heard from Patrick in the context of a business relationship. A woman Patrick had described as a silent investor in the wellness facility who had provided capital at the early stage when the build-out was being funded. Her name was Claudia Reyes. Natalie had heard this name twice, in casual references that Patrick had made in passing, and had thought nothing of it because silent investors in small businesses are common and Patrick's mention of her had been peripheral. What Dr. Kaur found when she traced Claudia Reyes was not a silent investor. Claudia Reyes was a woman who had been in a personal relationship with Patrick for the year prior to his relationship with Natalie. A woman who had contributed, according to the financial records Dr. Kaur was able to reconstruct, approximately $180,000 to what Patrick had described to her as their shared business venture. A woman who also had no legal ownership position in the entity. A woman who also had not known about Natalie. Natalie was not the first. She was not the only. She had been running in parallel with a prior victim who had not yet understood what she was, and whose money had been absorbed into the same structure through the same mechanism. The forensic accountant had not been hired to find this. She had found it because this kind of money trail does not stay contained to the people who are watching it. Natalie's attorney contacted Claudia Reyes through legal channels. Claudia did not know about Natalie. She had not known about Natalie when she was with Patrick, and she did not know about Natalie now. What she did know was that she had spent the previous 2 years unable to reconcile the financial records of a business she believed she had co-founded, and that she had never been able to obtain any documentation for, and that Patrick had told her repeatedly was in a structuring phase that required patience. She had not contacted an attorney. She had not known she had grounds to. She had been waiting for the patience he had asked for to produce the results he had promised. She had been waiting for 2 years. She found out about Natalie and about the forensic accountant's findings in a phone call from Natalie's attorney that lasted 45 minutes, and that Claudia described to Natalie when they eventually spoke directly as the most clarifying and most devastating 45 minutes of her professional life. The two women had never met. They had been funding the same structure from the same person through the same mechanism in overlapping time periods, and neither had known the other existed. Together, their financial exposure was $580,000. Together, they had grounds for a case significantly more serious than anything either could have pursued independently. The second twist arrived on day 8 of Dr. Kaur's investigation. She had been tracing the business's actual revenue and valuation. Not the version Patrick had shared with Natalie, but the actual financials from the business's operating accounts. And what she found contradicted the picture Patrick had maintained with Natalie in a way that changed the entire financial dimension of the case. The wellness facility was not, as Patrick had represented to Natalie in every financial conversation they had ever had, a business of modest but growing profitability that had not yet reached the point where investment could be returned. The wellness facility was profitable, significantly profitable. It had been generating strong positive cash flow for the previous 14 months. It had been doing so in accounts that Natalie had not had access to and had not been shown. The business Patrick had described as a shared dream in need of continued investment and patience had been returning significant revenue for over a year. Revenue that had been going to Patrick and to the holding company and to a set of accounts that no one who had invested in the business under the impression of shared ownership had been given any visibility into. He had not simply taken her money and done nothing with it. He had taken her money, built a profitable business with it, and then continued to receive her money while the business was already generating revenue he was not disclosing. He had been collecting her continued contributions while the business was already profitable. He had been collecting her trust while the business was already his in every financial and legal sense that mattered. The third twist, the one Dr. Kaur presented to Natalie's attorney on the morning of day 9, with the specific composed delivery of a professional who has seen many things and is not easily shocked, but who understands when something is unusually complete, was the exit. Dr. Kaur had found a letter of intent, dated 6 weeks before Natalie had asked to see the financials, between Patrick and an acquisition firm that was expressing interest in purchasing the wellness facility. The purchase price in the letter of intent was $4.2 million. This was the number that changed every other number in the case. Not because $4.2 million was the amount Natalie was owed, but because $4.2 million was evidence that Patrick had known the value of the business and had been pursuing a sale of the business at that valuation while continuing to describe the business to Natalie as an early-stage venture requiring continued patient investment. He had been preparing to sell something for $4.2 million while telling the person who had funded a significant portion of its development that the business was not yet at the return stage. He had been planning the exit. He had been managing her expectations to prevent her from taking any action that would interfere with the exit. And the exit, when it completed, would have generated $4.2 million for an entity in which no one whose money had built it had any legal interest at all. The exit had not yet completed. Dr. Kaur's report, filed with the attorney on the afternoon of day 9, contained an emergency injunction recommendation. The attorney filed for an injunction to prevent the sale before 5 o'clock that afternoon. The injunction was granted. The acquisition firm received notice the following morning. The firm's attorneys contacted Patrick's attorneys within 48 hours. Patrick had not known the investigation had occurred. He had not known Claudia had been found. He had not known Dr. Kaur existed. He had not known about the letter of intent being discovered. He had understood Natalie's attorney contact as a standard relationship dissolution proceeding and had instructed his attorney to manage it as such. What his attorney received instead was a 67-page forensic accounting report, an emergency injunction halting a $4.2 million acquisition, and a civil complaint naming Patrick Voss as the defendant in claims of fraud, unjust enrichment, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of assets, filed jointly by Natalie and Claudia as co-plaintiffs. The civil complaint was later supplemented by a referral to the State Attorney General's office for review of the financial conduct documented in the report. The AG's office opened an investigation. Patrick's attorney contacted Natalie's attorney 3 weeks after the complaint was filed and asked to discuss settlement. Natalie's attorney said, "There is nothing to discuss at this stage. There is only the discovery process and then the trial unless your client chooses to make an offer that reflects the full financial findings of the forensic accounting report." The litigation took 16 months. It settled in month 14 under terms that Natalie has negotiated the right to characterize as fully satisfying. What she can say, and has said, is that both she and Claudia recovered the full amounts they had contributed plus interest calculated at the rate her attorney had specified in the complaint, that the acquisition of the wellness facility did not proceed in its originally intended form due to the cloud on the asset created by the litigation, and that the State Attorney General's investigation produced a separate proceeding that she had no control over and no involvement in, but that resulted in Patrick's permanent exclusion from registered management positions in business entities in the state. She does not know where Patrick is now. She has organized her life so that the answer to that question does not need to be known. She does know where Dr. Sandra Kaur is. She sends her a card every year on the anniversary of the day the injunction was filed. Dr. Kaur has received 6 of them. I asked Natalie, after everything, after the investigation and the litigation and the second plaintiff and the failed acquisition and the AG proceeding and the 6 years that have passed since she transferred the first dollar to a personal account she believed was a joint business account. I asked her what she would tell someone who was standing where she had been standing at 34. Someone with savings they had worked for and a dream they had built, and a person beside them who seemed to share the dream and had a vision for how it could become real. She was quiet for a long moment. And then she said, I would tell them to read the paperwork before they move a dollar. Not have someone explain the paperwork to them. Read it themselves. Every page. Every entity name. Every registered owner. I would tell them that love and shared dreams are real things that can coexist with documents that tell a completely different story about who owns what. I would tell them that a person who resists showing you the paperwork is showing you the paperwork. And I would tell them that the money always knows. She paused. She said, the money knew from day one. It went exactly where he directed it. Every dollar I gave him went to the precise account he intended it to reach and created the precise legal outcome he had structured it to create. There was no error, no miscommunication, no oversight. Everything I experienced as a shared dream was, on his side, a financial plan. The dream was mine. The plan was his. The forensic accountant found the difference. She found every penny of it, and she found it in 9 days. Thank you for being here on Venom Thread tonight. If this story reached you, if there is a conversation about a shared business or a joint investment happening in your life right now, read the paperwork. All of it. Before the first dollar moves. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. New darkness next week. And we are nowhere near done.